Invictus Theatre Company is presenting Angels in America Part 1 and Part 2 now through September 7th. We have director Charles Askenaizer here to chat all about bringing Tony Kushner's iconic play to the stage. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rudy. Thanks for having me.
You know, not just the director, but also the founding artistic director of Invictus Theatre Company. You guys have been doing some great stuff, especially recently. I mean, let's just take a moment to celebrate that.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Network, Winter's Tale. I mean, talk a little bit about, the new space and, some of the things, especially people who are new to this theater company.
Yeah. Well, we, there was a fire at our old space, the Thorndale location, the Reginald Vaughn Theater. It was a 36-seat theater, and there's actually a fire at the coffee shop next door, and it spread over to our theater, and we were displaced, and we're lucky enough to wind up in a newer, bigger, badder venue at the Windy City Playhouse, and the landlord she's a theater person as well, so she was very amenable to having us there because we could not have afforded it otherwise. And yeah, we've just been producing ever since and working on the stuff that we love to work on and on a bigger scale.
Exactly. I mean, it's a big scale. Let's talk a little bit about Angels in America. It's a big show. It's a big part of our community, a big part of our community's history. The decision to bring, Part 1 and Part 2 to the stage. I mean, talk a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't do Part 1 without doing Part 2, in my opinion. I think Part 1 is made better by Part 2, and I think Part 2 is made better by Part 1. And I know some companies try to do Part 1. That is the one that won the Pulitzer. Although they both won the Tony Award, but I just think it is such a breathtaking odyssey. And by the end of it, we've had a few Saturday shows now with audiences, and you kind of form this communal experience of sitting in the theater for 7 hours with these other people, experiencing all these emotions and thoughts and language that Kushner puts out there, and it's an experience that I don't think people get to be a part of very frequently.
Yeah, I mean, first time on Broadway in '93, the revival in 2017. We also have, the miniseries and many different versions of it. But, as we get farther removed from that time period in the 80s, you talk a little bit about maybe some of the younger audience members or people who might be seeing it for the first time and, what that's like, especially maybe some of those conversations at intermission or after the show.
Yeah, what's really surprising to me, because it is such a masterpiece, and it was such a big deal, and especially in the 90s when it came out. And then, I was actually hanging up posters and handing out postcards in some of the neighborhoods in Chicago. And some people, I would hand them a poster and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Angels in America, I'm so excited," but then there'd be other people that are like, "What is this? I've never heard of this. Tell me about this." And I was sort of shocked because it was, such a landmark and so instrumental. I mean, when it first came out, people were coming to see that show with their parents, and either coming out to their parents afterwards or even like telling them that they were dying of AIDS as well. And it's just had such an impact. And that, 35-ish years later, a lot of the themes are still so relevant, especially Tony Kushner was very prescient in his writing. He was almost like a fortune teller, and when you ask him about it, he just sort of scoffs and he goes, "Well, I just write about what's happening now." And of course, here we are, same stuff, different decade.
Yeah, we have 7.5 hours of show material, but kind of break down a little bit for someone who's unfamiliar with the story. What we're going to see, in the show. That's a big question. There's a lot going on in that amount of time, but just kind of break down maybe some of the themes or some of the characters that we're going to see.
Yeah. Well, so he has a superlative title to the show that he calls it a gay fantasia on national themes, and I think that's the best way to encapsulate it. You will see ghosts and angels and historical figures. It follows, I suppose, if there is one central protagonist, it follows a young gay man in New York in the 80s who contracts AIDS, Prior Walter, and it follows his story. But all of the characters are real. It's really an ensemble piece. But yeah, it takes some wild turns, and it's a very exciting piece.
Talk a little bit about casting, those conversations during rehearsal and bringing those first couple of performances, to the stage, because a lot of people, this is probably their first introduction, obviously now we have social media and different ways to connect with community, but this was something that people would read maybe on their own and experience together as a community, in the theater for the first time. And talk a little bit about the impact, of this play on the cast.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking about this with somebody else. It's not that Kushner's saying anything that we don't already know necessarily, but what I think he's doing is he's putting words to it and putting words to it really, really well. And I mean, that's what makes effective theater is putting words to the wordless and making what's within without. I think that there was a great sense of community amongst the cast right off the bat, just undertaking this show. It's like everybody sort of prepped themselves for, okay, we're in it for a marathon.
Yeah.
We have to do justice to this play because the play deserves it. Our community deserves it. And we as artists deserve it too. So I think everyone's kind of gone in head first 110%. And, I think that's the biggest impact that it's had on the cast is just the sense of bonding that it's brought them together.
That is amazing. The set. Let's talk a little bit. You guys have done some creative things at Invictus. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. As far as utilizing that space. But talk a little bit about what you guys are doing as far as the show goes.
Yeah. Well, so in Millennium Approaches, one of the big themes is justice, and there is so much about justice and about God abandoning the angels and about religion. And we were kind of trying to figure out like a focal point, and of course, America, a gay fantasia on national themes. And our set designer, Kevin Rolfs, who's just brilliant, we kind of came to the conclusion that we're setting it in an under construction or an abandoned and now under construction courthouse. So when people come in, it's like this hall of justice that has been abandoned and now is sort of being rebuilt, but also the construction of it was abandoned as well too. It'll make more sense when you see it, but I think it's very pertinent to our country now as well. And I think it kind of ties those big themes in together really, really well.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. You guys always do such an incredible job. So I cannot wait to see this one. The conversation, I guess, maybe even the bigger theme of maybe some of the, elders in the community. I'm not even sure. I know they use the term like elder millennial, but maybe some of the, and I don't want to say older gays, but just that point of generations connecting with each other and knowing their stories, because everyone has a focal point of like when they grew up, what impacted them. But sharing these things that are important. There's a lot of talk now, especially during Pride Month, about Stonewall, but this is also a big part of our history, as well too. And making sure you share those stories and that what we've gone through and not having to go through that again. I mean, talk a little bit about that part of it.
Yeah, well, it kind of ties into what you were asking earlier about how it's impacted younger audiences. Even in the cast, some of the cast members, and myself included, like I was born in '88, so I was not aware of the AIDS crisis or anything that was going on politically. But we do have older cast members who did live through it, and so it's been so wonderful to hear their experiences of going through the AIDS crisis and living through it. Our actor who plays Roy actually, has been very insightful. And one of the things that I really, really stressed with the cast is the danger of this disease. We are coming out of COVID, so we kind of have this sense of this national pandemic. But the AIDS crisis, the research we were doing, I was reading stories about, it would not be uncommon to see people dying in the streets, these like skeletal figures. And it's I watched this documentary called 5B, which was about the first AIDS ward in San Francisco, and it's just, the disease is just horrific. And I wanted to make sure that the cast was very aware of its implications and sort of carrying that legacy, that story, and doing it justice and doing honor to it. Sorry, I'm getting a little verklempt, but it's just very overwhelming.
Yeah, so, people have not seen that documentary. It is such an incredible film.
Yeah.
I think one of the things too, especially that was such a light bulb moment, and not to take away from Angels in America, but what they were saying, as people were kind of coming out and in the 80s, that people had to kind of accept HIV and the AIDS crisis and coming out at the same time. Like it was a double-edged sword. And I think that's what made it so difficult. And especially that generation that came, after, it's such a difficult thing to navigate because it wasn't one and then the other. They both kind of came out simultaneously. But definitely a wonderful documentary to go ahead and check out as well too. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Something that I learned throughout all this. The L in LGBTQ, they put L first because it was the lesbian community that helped the gay community during the AIDS crisis. Like they were the ones that were championing, and so that's why the L is at the beginning. And I never knew that until partaking in this journey. So,
and I didn't know that until right now.
yeah, it's kind of an amazing thing. So, yeah.
I know we talked a little bit about part 1 and part 2. Can people see it on different nights? Do they have to stay the whole time? Tell us a little bit about how the show's kind of organized, so people can get their schedules together.
Yeah. So Friday nights we do part 1. For those who have the grit and who want the full experience, on Saturday matinee we do part 1, and then Saturday evening we do part 2. I highly recommend seeing it that way because that is how it is intended to be seen. But I understand that not everyone can sit for 7 hours. And then Sunday matinees are part 2, and then our Monday evening performances alternate between part 1 and part 2. So you just have to check our website to see which one we're doing on Monday.
And that website is invictustheatreco.com for tickets and for the schedule. Charles, thank you so much for your time today. I cannot wait to go ahead and check it out and experience the show.
Thank you, Rudy. I'm excited to see you there.